Thank you for coming to our digital Playhouse this Wednesday evening. And to whoever you are and wherever you're from, you're very welcome. Now, obviously, we would have wished it were different this evening. We would have wished to be experiencing this moment with you in the same room. But the fact is we have an audience tonight. In fact, we have two. We have yourselves, wherever you are, and we have the people who are in front of me right now in the theatre, people who have been placed there by Fiona McLaughlin with great care, people who have been lost to the Troubles or to some other thing, and relatives of theirs have sent in mementos, and as I say, Fiona has placed them there. Normally she would be welcoming you, but she has been welcoming these people. They are here, and the actors will be playing to them. This is their audience. Now, on the stage, there will not be a galaxy of extraordinary actors. There is one. We have one professional actor of that caliber. The other people, they're not professionals. They may or may not forget some things, but there are things because of the nature of their lives that they cannot forget. And because of the way their stories come through them, I don't think you will forget them either. So as I said, not a galaxy of professional actors, but a group, I can tell you, of extraordinary human beings who are putting their hearts on the line. So about 45 minutes in, there will be an interval, and the whole thing lasts about 2 hours, and then at the end there'll be a wee break, and there'll be a question and answer session. It'd be great if you could stay for that as well. But thanks again for coming.
Oh my, you make me sigh, you're such a good-looking woman. People stop, people stare, you know it fills my heart with... For flip's sake. Well, are they to think I'm picking that up? They've another thing coming to them. Now, the nice people, don't get me wrong, but clarity is be damned. That'll be one of their exercises. Writing things down, dragging their thoughts out of their poor heads, kicking and screaming. That's not exercise. Here's exercise for you. But lovely people. I'd do anything for them, but I'm not lifting that. locked down by the bounty. It struck me just today that the cathedrals would hardly have used their Easter candles. So I went round this morning and sure enough, they'll not be using half-eaten ones in the next year. So they gave me these. See me? Always thinking. Always thinking. I wanted to be a philosopher, you know. After I'd done my A-levels, I says to me dad, I want to study philosophy, Dad. Good for you, son, he said. I'll philosophy, said me ma. You'll get out of here with work. That was the end of that. Oh, Jesus. That's the ones that don't know their way around. Oh, I wish somebody could have asked me about all this. But oh no, I'm just a cleaner. Just a bloody cleaner. And if they had, do you know what I'd have said? If you need to talk to somebody, talk to yourself. Talk to yourself out loud, like I do. Like I'm doing now. That way you stay safe. That way there's no harm done.
What I remember about the 4th of May 1972 was, it was a beautiful day. And I remember running along the terrace houses that all backed onto the school football pitch. And in between, there was an army lookout post wedged in between the houses that faced into the school football pitch. And there was a lot of rubble lying about because there was a burnt out building there. I still remember it as a beautiful scene. And then the next thing I remember is I woke up and I was lying on the school canteen table. And I remember it was like talking through a fog. My music teacher, Mr. Giles Doherty, was there. And he was asking me, was I okay? And he asked me my name. I told him my name was Richard Burr. He got a bit of a shock because he knew me very well. I was in his music class. But he wasn't able to identify me because of the extent of the injuries. You know, my eyeballs were out of their sockets and they were down to my cheekbones. My face had been pushed back to the back of my head almost. And all during the time in hospital, I thought that I couldn't see because of the bandages on my eyes. So I was making jokes about, I can't wait to get these bandages off my eyes. I teach you how to play football. And I'm sure that must have been very difficult for my family. They kept a constant vigil around the bed. But it was about, a month after I was shot, I was out at home, and there had been various attempts, looking back at it now, by members of my family to try and tell me that I was going to be blind. But this particular day, my brother Noel, who was roughly 10 years older than me, took me for a walk out the back garden, and that's when he told me that I would be blind for the rest of my life. And to be honest, I accepted it there and then. I literally absorbed it and just moved on. Until I was on my own in bed that night, and I cried for the one and only time that I remember about blindness. And I cried because I realised for the first time that I was never going to see my mommy and daddy again. And that was a big sense of loss for me. My daddy was a very practical man. I think in many ways my daddy was a very smart man. And, he single-handedly put my education together. Around the time, all the advice my daddy was getting was to send Richard to a school for the blind. That meant that I would have had to go and live in Georgetown and Belfast 4 or 5 nights a week. And to be honest, that would have been more traumatic, more hurtful for me than being shot itself. It would have been like another price to pay. I'm not only shot and blinded, but now I have to live away from home. And I know that was tearing my daddy and mommy inside, because I had this feeling that I wasn't coming back. And when I got down there, they separated me from my mommy and daddy and took me around the school. And I can remember thinking, this is not for me. I don't belong here. My mommy said to my daddy in the car, Liam, I don't think we could send Richard down there. My mammy basically had a mental breakdown after I was shot, although that was never really diagnosed. So he would have struggled with all that process of all the advice that he would have been given. And my daddy valued people that he thought knew better than him. I got grade ones in my CSEs, and my daddy come up, and he woke me up, and he read the paper to me. And I was a typical 16-year-old. I wanted to hear it, but I didn't want my daddy to know I wanted to hear it. It was many years later, my brother was telling me that my daddy was so delighted because that day he knew that he made the right decision. Many, many years later, 30-odd years later, I was told that my daddy, when the doctors told my daddy that I would be blind for the rest of my life, my daddy said to the doctors, "Can I give him my eyes?" You know, different members of my family who are older than me obviously knew my daddy and used to sit and watch movies with him and even go out and socialise with him. I had none of that. And I must not been able to sit down and sort of talk to my daddy about me, about him, about how he dealt with my blindness, how he dealt with the whole shooting, and even to understand his forgiveness.
There you go. There you go now. If you need me, I'll be here.
That's grand, thanks. Look, we'll see yourselves out. Don't be
Are
worrying.
you sure?
Aye, definitely.
But I have a wee thing for you.
You have a wee thing for her?
No, I've something for both of you.
Just shut up and leave him alone. Don't pay no attention to him.
Right. Okay.
Look, we'll see yourselves out.
I'll leave you. to
All
it.
right, no bother.
I was actually born in the Glen, and we moved to the Northland in 1960 when I was 15 or 16 months old. It was a happy place. It was a great place to live. The Northland was 99% Protestant back then. Council houses with Catholics on the perimeter. In the late 60s, there'd be the odd skirmish when young ones would throw stones into the estate and we'd go out and meet them halfway. I started Tiltonmore Secondary School in 1970, and on the way home, gangs of youths could cross paths. If there was more of us, then we'd win. If there were more Catholics, then they'd win. But we also had Catholic friends, ones we palled around with, so there couldn't have been hatred for Catholics as such. Yes, when July and August came around, your blood was up. What did that mean? It meant you were up. Let's kill death things. Let's kick the Pope and all he stands for. You learn from your no high. Two sides were no different. You watched and you learned. I remember 1969 and Protestants getting burned out of their homes atop Academy Road and other places. And we were next. I remember building the barricades. I remember storing the petrol bombs. It was scary sometimes, but your adrenaline was up. The thought was, protect the home. Protect the home. But I had Catholic friends. I ran around with the Cliffords. They were newspaper people, and we'd deliver the iron on Saturday night. We'd often go for a bite to eat at Collins Chippy on a Saturday night, and it was always the same order for me. Sausage supper, batter sausage, and a can of Coke. I wasn't brought up to hate. I was lucky, my mum especially. I never heard my mother say a bad word about anyone. But it was a tension that evolved after Bloody Sunday. When that came ricocheting into the city, that's when the two sides really fell apart. Looking back, as an adult, Bloody Sunday was a bad thing, but back then at 13, you weren't getting facts. As far as we were concerned, there was a gun battle, and if the army had fired, then they had fired back, and if they had fired back, then they were fired at first. But something else was beginning to happen round about then, something that was to be of great personal importance. The Glen had what they called a social club, built by the people of the estate. And back then, the government didn't do things, and the people built the hall. The word went round they were starting these discos or hops on a Thursday night. There was a young guy called Ken Robinson, older than us by 5 or 6 years. Ken didn't smoke, drink, or go with bad women. Ken supplied the music, and Richie Hamilton was the DJ. And in 1972, they were starting to involve the young people in doing things. I had a few goes at being a DJ. I took to it. I loved it. I loved the music. You became a showman, someone else. Clown's not the word, except a clown too has a different face. You're there to protect an image, and there's certain things about your personality you have to change and about who you are. When Richie decided that he'd had enough, I took over. And I later got gigs in Kilfan and Lincoln Courts and the odd one in Airy Street. I was doing this Thursday, Friday and Saturday nights at £2 a night. £2 was 4 singles back then, as far as I was concerned. Later, with what happened to the family, music was to save me. In fact, at a crossroads, it's fair to say that music saved my life. In 1972, my father was a joiner for what was then the London Dairy Development Commission, but he was also a part-time member of the UDR. The morning after Bloody Sunday, Dad went to work as normal, and 2 men came into the yard. I spoke to the foreman, and he pointed out my dad as the only joiner there. They'd wanted something made, either stands for coffins or covers for graves, and they needed them in a hurry. They were to be used for the funeral of those killed on Bloody Sunday. My dad said he'd stay and make them, and they'd call for them the next day. Dad told them they're still wet, varnish, but take them and be careful, and away they went. A week later, they came back looking for him. We know who you are and what you're in, they said. Round about then, they just started to murder members of the UDR. But what you did was appreciated, and you'll not be touched. Dad said, I'll take my chances in uniform, but you leave the house and my family alone. And they didn't touch him. Nobody in the family was touched when them men were in charge. But 1976, the house was attacked. First it was petrol bombed, and then one evening my mum was standing with my 2-year-old niece when this massive brick came through the window. Later, a bomb was thrown at the house. My mother was crippled with arthritis. She could never get out of there in a hurry. We moved out the next day, but there was 4 or 5 men standing at the top of the street watching. A gang of youths came down and started throwing stones, and these guys had a word, and the gang disappeared. But I think the leadership must have changed by 1981, February. On February the 10th, my brother David was shot dead at 4:05 in the afternoon. He was a part-time member of the UDR, and they shot him at a place of work in his timber yard. He had a brush in his hand sweeping the floor, and they fired 7 shots at him, hitting him twice in the back of the neck. When something like that hits the family, you have a choice. Grief affects people differently. We live in a society where, in their anger, many people would seek revenge. But as I said, I wasn't brought up to hate. I lived in the Fountain, time of David's free murder. And on the Thursday night, 2 men come into the yard. 2 men called the door. I brought them in and they said, you say the word and there's 2 going down for it. Very probably 2 randomly selected Roman Catholics. I didn't know the men, but as they saw it, this wasn't just a UDR man that had been killed. This was a Protestant, as part of an attack on the whole Protestant community. I could see my mother through the frosted glass sitting in the kitchen, broken. And you want more of that, I said to the men. You want to bring that to other people's doors. Well, I don't. We got the word out that we wanted no retaliation. And to my knowledge, there was none, thank God. When something like that happens to a family, you hit a crossroads. You can either go down the road seeking vengeance, or you can carry on as normal as you're fit for in that situation. My brother Bertie went down one road and became very politically involved in the UDA. In November 2004, he was found in UDA headquarters in the city. He had committed suicide. But I was lucky. I had music. Right from the early 70s, I had music. My first record was Chicory Tips, son of my father, back in 1972. And music really did it for me. And you needed something to take you away from it all. There was no such thing as counselling back then. But I can get lost. If there's a song I love, I can get totally lost. I mean, I love Bobby Goldsborough's Honey. I could listen to Honey on repeat all the time. And when you're out doing a disco, you became someone else. You were someone else, not so angry. It made you feel better. It made you better. And music gave me happiness and joy and peace when I needed those things most. And you know something? It still does.
Victor said that music saved his life. Well, my husband, Trevor Deeney, saved mine. In 1972, I was just a wee girl, running about, not taking anything in. But on the 8th of April, 1998, I became a widow. It happened in front of my eyes, and I took everything in, and it went right through me. On the 8th of April 1998, when the country was sitting on tenterhooks, waiting to see if an agreement could be reached that would change the political landscape of our country, my life changed. My husband, Trevor Deeney, worked in a local car component factory not far from where we lived. He'd worked there for about 3 years. After completing various schemes when he had come out of prison. Trevor had served 5 years for attempting to shoot someone. Trevor had been a very high-ranking member in the local UVF, and he'd served his time on the UVF wing in the Maze prison. That organisation had been a major part of his life, not mine. He joined as a boy at 16. Over the years, that organisation came between me and my family. It impacted sometimes on our family life. Me, I could say that I was the mistress to the UVF. On the 8th of April 1998, Trevor had been on a 40-12 shift, and I left the house as normal to go and pick him up. When he finished his shift, he got into the car and we began the drive home. Driving up the Crescent Link Road onto the Ross Downey Road, I noticed that the street lights had been out, but it didn't put much pass on it. I was driving, so I just continued on, drove down the hill and drove into the driveway. Trevor was an extremely house-proud person, and he would never have went into the house with his work boots on. So he put his foot up onto the dashboard of the car and began to unlace his boots. We saw these two people running, but we couldn't work out what was going on. We looked up. There was two gunmen standing in black jackets and freckled masks. One was standing beside the passenger windscreen and one was standing beside the passenger window. Trevor began to shout, "I'm going to die, I'm going to die." He grabbed me by the waist and the gunmen began to shoot. One of the bullets hit Trevor and he slumped towards me and I fell towards the driver's door. And when I did that, the bullet went through my headrest, narrowly missing my head. Another bullet went right past my knees into the driver's door. The shooting seemed to go on for a long time, but the reality is it was probably just a few minutes. There was total silence. I thought they'd gone away. I was able to open the car door, drag him across the passenger door, and we fell onto the driveway. I was lying underneath him. We looked up. The gunmen began to reload their guns and come run round the side of the car. And I started to cry. They're going to kill me now, they're going to kill me. Trevor heard that and he released his grip on me and I was able to slide out from underneath him and I ran down the side of the house. And as I was running down the side, I dropped my purse. And I remember thinking, Jesus, I've dropped my purse, I've dropped my purse. I mean, how mad is that? How mad is that to think that? I got to the oil tank and I had to stand there, froze to the spot, and watch while the gunman stood over his body and shot him. With every bullet that went in, his body flinched. Again, this seemed to go on for a long time. It went quiet again. And I thought, they're coming now for me. They're going to come down now to get me. When I thought it was safe, I got down on my hands and knees and I crawled into the kitchen and I rang the ambulance. And then I rang down to my mommy's house and I was telling my brother, please come, please come. Trevor's been shot, please come. I remember thinking, I want to go out then. I need to go out then. But I was wild scared, I was too frightened. And I thought, you need to wise up, you need to go out, he needs you. I went out the door. I didn't even go near him. I ran down the street and back up again with my mouth open, with no words coming out. All of a sudden, the ambulance and my brothers all came to the house. And to this day, I couldn't tell you how I got to the hospital because I really don't know. But when I got there, they put us all in a wee room. And the doctor came in and said, Mrs. Deaney, your husband's very ill. It'll be an uphill struggle, but we will do our best. A short time later, he came back in and said, I'm sorry, he's dead. He had drowned in his own blood. The doctor allowed Trevor's brother, Robert, and me to go into the resuscitation room to see him. And I remember there was all these sheets around the bed and they were saturated in blood. The blood was running down his arms, onto his hands, and onto his fingers. Drip, drip, drip. His body, it was like a human sieve. The next few days passed as a blur. There was hundreds of people coming in and out of the house. We were inundated with press. On the day of the funeral, the police lined the two sides of the streets with police Land Rovers. There was hundreds attended the funeral. There was lots of press, both national, international and local. They were really intrusive and had no respect. It was like a circus. They weren't interested that you were putting a loved one to rest. They just wanted to know, did Jeffrey Deaney get out for the funeral? Which one's Jeffrey Deaney? Trevor got buried on the 10th of April 1998, a poignant day for our country. It's the day that the Good Friday Agreement was signed. 2 days too late for our family. The following weeks and years that passed were lots of turmoil, lots of depression, lots of mental health. I remember taking the kids to school in the car and I couldn't get them there fast enough to get back home. They set the alarm to go back up to pick them up, and I would just get into bed and pull the quilt over my head thinking, I don't want to live. I used to lie thinking of ways to kill myself. But something within inside me told me, you have 4 kids here. You need to pull yourself together. You need to be there and be strong for them. My greatest achievement in life has been my 4 children. They're my everything, and they needed me. I believe as a parent that we're the primary educators and we teach our children what's right and what's wrong. And I'm proud to say that I brought up 4 amazing, beautiful children to become into caring, loving adults who have achieved so much personally and through academia, and have the pleasure of giving me 8 grandchildren. My children don't look at people to see whether they're Protestant or Catholic. They look at people and judge them for who they are and what they are. That's the greatest achievement of all. You see, for me, I refuse to be defined as a victim or a survivor. I'm me. In 1972, I might have been a young girl, and in 1998, I became a widow like so many hundreds of people before me. I didn't even think anybody would be interested in listening to my story, and I have only told it very few times. But I believe now's the time to tell this story and let people know.
You're a better man than me, the Perry. My dada used to say, if everything's in its place, you know where you are. One decent man, my dad. And a very clean man. That's not a big thing with people nowadays. Cleanliness. Or it wasn't before the coronavirus. And if that has taught us one thing, it's that keeping ourselves away from each other keeps us away from harm. You have to admire those people, though. Still standing. Wanting to do good. Wanting to forgive. I can't even forgive my wife after all this time. She walked out on her sacred vows over what? Me not paying attention. Would you credit that? What did she want, I tell you? She wanted to talk. She wanted to chittering all about bloody time. She wanted a budgie. Well, there's a time for talk, maybe. A time and a place, but you couldn't tell some people that. And do you know how I know it's not time for my wife's sort of talk here in Northern Ireland? They empty your whole head out on the table talk. Because there's no songs about it. When people are ready for something, they sing songs about it. We shall overcome. We shall not be moved. Oh, you won't get me, I'm part of the union. So sing if you're glad to be gay. Someone writes them, and people sing them when they're ready. And we're not ready to say everything or to forgive everything. There's no songs about them things just yet. And when there's no song about a thing, it's not time for it. Well, that's my story anyway, and I'm sticking to it.
I've always felt that I've been in a relationship with somebody that I've never met. In many ways, it's like looking into a shadow, where there's somebody there, but you don't know who they are. And that person has played such an important part in my life. So eventually, after 33 years, I found out who the soldier was that shot me, and his name's Charles. So I sent him a letter, and I think my letter was fairly warm and friendly. And it's a very hard thing to do when you sit down to write a letter to somebody like that, to try and capture in a few pages what your motivation is, the person that you are, and why you want to meet them, because I knew there would have been a level of suspicion on his part, possibly. I didn't know how he would receive it. But the letter I got back, I think, was certainly not as warm or as friendly as what mine was. For example, in the letter he said that he never felt guilty about shooting me, and that he felt justified. And I can remember how those words literally jumped out of the page at me, and it did kind of stop me in my tracks. But there was another line at the end of the letter which I kind of, after a few hours, I sort of began to focus on more than the guilt and the feeling justified. And that was that, with the benefit of hindsight, he regrets ever firing the rubber bullet. And I suppose when I got looking at the letter in more detail, I realised he never signed the letter. The letter was typed, and his address wasn't on it. So I viewed the letter as more like a statement than a letter. And that kind of gave me an indication that Charles was obviously, in my view, afraid of the process. He didn't know where I was going to take all this. So in many ways, as much as he wanted to meet me, I think, he was shoring up his side of the argument in case I would take it in a direction that maybe he didn't want. So eventually we met on the 14th of January 2006, and that day was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I learnt two things about forgiveness that day. The first thing is Forgiveness is first and foremost a gift that you give to yourself. So forget about Charles. If he wants my forgiveness, he has it. But that's not what's important. What's important for me and here, in my heart, for my peace of mind, that I forgive him. So forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about me. The second thing I realised was forgiveness isn't going to change the past, but it will change the future. And again, you know, the fact that I forgive Charles isn't going to give me back my eyesight. Isn't going to take away all those hurts that were caused to me and my family all those years ago. But what it did do and has done is change my future. And you know, I genuinely don't believe I would be the person I am today, having the happy, contented, fulfilled life that I've had, and even being happy around being blind, if I had been wrecked with anger, bitterness and hatred. I know forgiveness may not be for everybody. I know many people find forgiveness difficult, and that's fair enough. You know, sometimes I think we can expect too much from victims. People do struggle to forgive, and that is totally understandable. But I share my story and share my thoughts on forgiveness in the hope that it helps somebody, helps you somewhere along the road to deal with whatever hurt you've experienced. We're not going to rightify every wrong, I think. We're not going to square every circle in a sense. So sometimes I think we need to park the past, and forgiveness, for me, is a way to do that. As well as that, I think from somebody like Charles's point of view, I think it's important if he did make a mistake in your life, if he did make a monumental blunder, and there's no question about it, Charles made a monumental blunder in my life that I've had to live with for the rest of my life. And thanks to the people around me and the response to my being shot and blinded, all that compassion and love that I experienced throughout my life, I was able to turn it into a positive experience. But still, I think even Charles and others who do terrible things deserve a second chance. They deserve to have the opportunity to move beyond the terrible thing that they did.
He loved his dad, that man. And mine loved me. When I was wee, he used to listen to me as if I was important. He loved me so much, he forgave me when I... My daddy was my hero, and he knew things before other people. On Bloody Sunday, I was just 18 and I knew very little, but I knew I wanted to go and he wouldn't let me. But word started to come in about what was happening, and I was going anyway. My dad barred my way at the door. "No, son," he said. "If you go out there now, you'll only become involved. And sooner or later, as sure as I'm standing here, you'll do things that go against everything I taught you. So you're not going out that door and that's the end of it." Do you know what I did when he said that? I beat him up. This decent wee man, my dad, I beat him up. He was barricading my road in that moment, and I wrecked him. But he forgave me. He forgave me, but his nerves went. He lost his zest or something. And it wasn't just me. The chaos here overwhelmed him. He gave up on hope. The light went out of him. Me too. But he's still the best wee man I ever knew. And he believed in me. More fool you, Dad. More fool you. And he's as much a victim of the Troubles as if somebody had shot him through the mouth with a pistol. Somebody else. I'm not lifting that, I'm serious. I know it's part of their, what do you call it, process. I've done it myself at my marriage guidance, but that was a cod, that was a bloody minefield. There's one time the woman says to me, could you say sorry to your wife? And I thought, not a bother, if it moves things on. But it was a trap, you see, for then she says, now, could you tell her what you're sorry for? It had been a trick question. Those two were a team. It wasn't enough to say that you were sorry. You had to be fit to say what you were sorry for. And then everything came down on top of me like hailstones. I was at this, I was at that, I never noticed. I never picked things up. Well, there you are, I picked that up. So give me head, peace. I'm a married woman, 45 years married this Christmas to a good man. My husband is a good man and I love him. But the love of my life died in 72. He had joined up in February and was shot dead 4 months later protecting the area. We had been together since primary school in Belfast. They should have taken me too, in a way they did. No, that's too much and it's not fair on my husband. But I thought I saw my love one day and I wrote this poem. Did you walk by me then and then in the daylight? Or was that a dream? My heart surged with sadness. The tears poured down my cheek at the vision I'd just seen. Please, oh please, look over here. This yearning is unreal. Your body, your hair, your clothes the same. My mouth wide open. I want to call your name. Your footsteps tread softly. I watch you walk away. Please, oh please, look over here. I hear myself say, touch can never be again. Our worlds too far apart. Please, oh please, look over here to mend my broken heart. You turned my love. Your loving eyes met mine, then melted like snow through my body to stay with me for all time.
I was born in March '56 and reared in Cregan. I was the youngest of four, 3 sisters and a brother, the eldest, 10 years older than me. In '62, our father went to England for work. He didn't return. And in '67, our mammy died. So at age 21, my brother and his young wife became my parents, I suppose. And at the start of the '70s, that young couple had their work cut out with me. The girl I was then, I was just full of having crack. partying, drinking, daubing school, meeting up with a boyfriend. I was living a life that was full of fun and rebellious. Not one thought to the hell it was creating at home. But I was also watching what was happening around me. At times, I get really passionate and annoyed about things. Things like the army, putting people up against the wall, putting me up against the wall. And I was drinking. And I was drinking in pubs. And because I was drinking in pubs, I was having these heated conversations. I was getting angrier and angrier. Why? Because, as I saw it, I couldn't walk down my own streets. If I wanted to go to Foyle Street, I had to go through iron gates. Someone would always catch my eye and say, that one's getting pulled over. I was getting thranner and just not learning. I can feel the anger rising in me now, talking to you. The way I felt at the bottom of Shipkey Street, standing up against the wall at the gate for 2 hours, waiting on the female searcher I'd requested. It took me a while to learn I was the only one suffering. Now, in the summers of 70 and 71, I'd have certainly been at the barricades. Because that's where the talent was. That's where the crack was. That's where you got a laugh. And that's where you got a can of Carlsberg. I certainly would have been throwing stones, but never petrol bombs. I couldn't tell you why. So yeah, I threw stones, but I never aimed at anyone. Oh, I have so full energy then. But all that energy, it was creating a lot of problems at home, a lot of tension. If a dance was over at 1 o'clock, there was an expectation I'd be home by 1:30. But I'd get talking to people. Everybody stood around to yak. Then we might go down to Cassoni's in the Strand Road for chips. Could have been 3:30, 4 o'clock before I got home from the embassy or the Stardust. That was creating a lot of problems, a lot of rows. Every now and again there'd be a big row and I'd have to go and live with my sister, her husband and their new baby. But after a while, I'd have a row with them too and I'd have to move back to Craigan. Just before Christmas 71, I decided I was leaving school. Whew, another major row. That time I had to eventually move in with my sister who had only just got married and was living at the age of Chantallo. In January 72, I was living there when I got a job as a dental, shall we say, nurse receptionist. That was a dream job for me. The man went to Donegal to work 3 days a week. What did I do when he was away? Basically, I had people in and we partied on the gas and air. I was escaping a lot and I was drinking a lot. On Bloody Sunday, I was confined to the house, my sister's house, strictly forbidden to go to the march. And for once, I did what I was told. I went out later, after the news had broke, heard all the names, and I knew so many of them. I couldn't make sense of how these young men that I knew had been mown down on our streets. You'd hear a name and you'd go, him? But he was so quiet. A few weeks before, my boyfriend had gone to England to work, and I remember I had arranged to phone him from the phone box the next day. I told him the names of the people who died. And he said, what? He just couldn't believe it. I couldn't say I saw too much of the funerals, but I'll never forget the feel of them, or the sound of the wailing and crying that rose up. It was just absolute grief, intense grief. And it spread over everybody and everything. After Bloody Sunday, there was this blackness. And that hung over the whole community. And it seemed to grow. And it changed me. I had this feeling I had to do something, but I didn't know what, and I didn't know how to do it. One of our friend's fathers had a business on William Street. He was very well known, very well connected. So I went up to see him. And I remember saying to him, something has to be done. We have to do something. I have to do something. And he said, don't get sucked in, Siobhan. Don't get sucked in. And I said to him, but you can't just sit back, watch, do nothing. We have to do something. I have to do something. He said, but it's not your job, Siobhan. It's not your job. If I'm honest, I had a whole mixture of feelings. On the one hand, I was saying to myself, get the fuck out of here. But on the other, I just wanted to do something. At some stage, there was an incident in Cregan. It could have been May. The weather was certainly better anyway. I was walking home, and a crowd had gathered outside the chapel gates. It was around the time of Ranger Best. It could have been before or after. I'm not sure. Anyway, me being nosy, I went over. A soldier, a very young soldier, had been caught. And this particular person, active in the community, he was threatening his life. He said he wanted to hang him from the chapel railings. Well, women were squealing, don't do it, don't do it. Other women were shouting, do it, do it. The young soldier was terrified. It was mayhem. The intensity of that do it, don't do it, it was unbelievable. And I just stood and watched. I couldn't deal with it. It was unbelievable. Eventually someone said, go and get Father Carlin. He was a priest well known, well respected in the community. When he arrived, he was challenged that he was hiding behind his collar. Well, he ripped that collar off and he said, you're not talking to Father Carlin now. It's Joe. For me, him ripping that collar off, that was a visceral explanation of how serious this was in our community. There were more ructions, but he took the young soldier away in his car. And I remember thinking, I don't want this. I don't want to be part of this. These are my people, but I don't want to be part of this. And then there was Motorman. Motorman, sheer pandemonium. We woke up to Saracen tanks, soldiers in the garden, not being allowed out, people being lifted left, right and centre. It was horrific, unreal, an unreal life. You felt like you were being squashed in, imprisoned, in your own home, your own area, your own life. And being imprisoned in your own life did not suit someone like me. A weeks later, I was away to London. My brother said, I'll give you 3 weeks. You'll not last longer than 3 weeks. But off I went, barely 16 years of age, off to London, and I stayed 5 years. I suppose in the end, I didn't belong there. But you know, when I came back here, there was a while I didn't belong here either. I was getting these dismissive remarks from certain people that I'd gone to England, had no right to call myself Irish still here in Derry. I went into psychiatric nursing and then into health visiting. And I was placed in Cregan and the Bogside. I could not have been happier. I was home. And then word spread, as it does, about who I was. And soon the whole of Cregan knew she's back. But you know something? I still carry that year, 1972. I still carry it with me. How do I know I carry it? I can't really talk about it without getting emotional or the fear of the emotion overcoming me. I don't think about it every day. I tend to not go to public things about it. But the day of the Savile report, Cameron's announcement, I just knew I had to go to the Guildhall to bear witness. And I cried. That blackness is absolutely carried through to now. There's something about genetic collective memory. And those young people who are still impoverished, still disadvantaged, they are most prey to that blackness. Now, how do you stop that? How do we, as a community, stop that?
So sorry I wasn't here when you came on.
You're all right, you're all right. Don't worry, not a bother. Not a bother. Are you all right?
I just out about my breath.
Oh.
And you can't even smoke here.
Oh, right.
Listen, this is for you.
For me?
And the others.
Oh. Oh, what is it?
It's just wee things.
Oh, okay. Thanks very much. I'll see myself out.
Right, you be.
Right.
And to see that you do. To see that you do. To see that you flip and do. To see that you flip and do. All right. Calm down. No, nobody died. Breathe in, breathe out. A nice woman. But about the same age as my ex-wife, give or take. Which reminds me, another thing the marriage counsellor did, and I couldn't get over this. She asked me how my sex life was. I didn't know where to look. But they were staring at me, the two of them, waiting on an answer. And I didn't want to let the wife down. So I'm meant to say decent. Meaning just like everybody else. Yeah, you know, good enough. But what came out of my mouth was adequate, which I don't think was too bad. But it sent my wife into a tailspin like a flipping Messerschmitt. Oh, but that's all in the past now, thank God. Oh no. How did that happen? There's ones won't come out, whatever you do. And this one is a bastard. These people have got me thinking. This talking thing. The reason I don't do it is it doesn't work. When you talk, you're either asking for something or you're telling people something. When you ask, you'll only be disappointed. And when you tell, you'll be telling lies. Trust me, I know. A friend of mine died in my arms in 72. I was holding his head and my lap was full of his blood. Am I going to die? He said. And I said no. Do you swear? He said. I swear on my daddy's life. And then he started to go. Like something melting in front of you. The weight went out of him. The light went out of his eyes. Tell my mommy and my daddy. Then he died. Where's the song for that? The bloody song to help you with that. There's a song to help you pick up your friggin' litter. Remember, you're a feckin' womble. But there's not one for me.
You okay?
Aye, it's just that disinfectant. It goes for your eyes. It means it's strong enough, I suppose.
You want to grab a wee seat and have a chat?
No. I'll listen in there.
No bother. I had a powerful imagination, and I loved in my head. I love the films. Down the pictures and the miners, especially them Roman films, all the merchant and man, my head was full of Spartacus. But what we were seeing in the cinema or watching on TV was now right outside our door, out in the street. Just crazy days. I mean, it's just,
I know there was lots of life and people were getting badly damaged with rubber bullets, but it was all about adventure for me. I was just jumping, and you know, I loved the riots. Have to be honest, I just loved the riots and the adrenaline, the excitement, and everything happening. And in fact, I'd be really disappointed when the ceasefires would come around and, gee, what are we going to do next? What do we do now? But I guess the important thing was defending the area. There used to be, I remember, a big horn would go at night, and right on the back of that would be the rumours. You know, oh, the B specials and the Peacebuilding are burning down the long-term chapel. That would get everybody going. There was local men organised. I can't remember their name. My dad was one of them, with his yellow hat out of DuPont. And, well, my dad was an incredible man. He really was. Now, his dad, he was something else. He was an out-gate. He told my father, from the age of 10 right up to he was 14, that when he got to 14, he was out. My dad thought he was joking. But sure enough, 14th birthday, bag was at the door. And that was the end of that. 1939, my dad, he joined the Royal Air Force at the outbreak of war. He was in the Lancaster bombers throughout the whole 5 years, and came back the end of it all. The wee house in the bogside, a warrant officer. I don't know, he never mentioned it, never talked about the war. But when he wasn't working and he had days off, it wasn't that often, but we could always go to him. He was always there for us. You go to him, well, I did, with me questions. Always had questions. And I had questions for my dad about what was happening, the IRA in 1916 in Ireland and England and all that stuff, and the Second World War as well. But he never mentioned it. He never mentioned the war. I think, you know, for me, my dad, when he was at work, well, my mad, you would call, was a bit of a soft touch, you know, so I was out whenever there was a riot or a big protest or a big meeting at Free Dairy. I would be in the middle of it. But when Bloody Sunday came around, well, my father, he wasn't working that day. And I think because of his airborne military experience, probably had a bit of more clue about what the parachute regiment were about. So he arranged for me to go to my married sister's house up in Rosemount. And I was held under house arrest in there. I was under strict orders, so I wasn't to go anywhere. But the news came filtering through the TV. And I remember the next day, first thing in the morning, just out the door and straight down to Russell Street. I remember walking, just the silence and there's wee groups of people standing at different spots where people were dead or died. Man, the atmosphere, you could have, you just knew in your heart and your spirit that something had changed, something huge had happened. Nothing would be the same. Even my dad changed. He knew this wasn't a civil rights battle, this wasn't a civil rights skirmish, this was war. But it was around that time my dad was actually diagnosed with cancer. And he actually died in March of '72. But it changed remember him bringing things out of dew ponds now that were protective gloves and other things. And man, it rattled me. It rattled me to the core. You know, I'd taken all my questions to my dad, and I'd taken questions to my older brother too, Wally. But he was away in university and sometimes England. But I remember Manus Deary. Manus was my cousin. But when we were young, we were pretty tight. We were close friends when we were wee boys. And he was a couple of years older than me, Manus. And Manus was shot dead by the British Army from the city walls, just behind the shops, around the corner again from our house. Manus was smart and he was funny, and I sort of looked up to him, and he looked out for me. You know, I remember the wake, my father's wake. Manus showed up. We'd already broken company. Manus was hanging out with other ones, you know, and he, was interested in girls. He was 15, I was 13, and I was still stuck in the Twilight Zone. I'd interested in girls, but I was still playing football and Japs and Americans. So, but at the wake, you know, that part that I dreaded, where the coffin leaves the house for the last time. I broke, and I remember Manus was there for me as we walked behind the coffin, shoulder to shoulder, for comfort, consolation. At the end of that year, I was all at sea. I was somebody else. Couldn't sleep that well. Still don't. Just up, sitting through the wee hours at night. It sort of became hard and bitter, and I could just, just close down. Of course, there was other things. All of us at that age were witnessing and seeing, but there was other things that would alter my life and change deepen the questions. Like Brian Coyle, he lived in the same street when I was growing up as well, St. Colm's Wells. We used to swap comics and things. The Victor, the Hornet, the Valiant, Action Men as well. Brian was well liked. He had a big heart. And Brian blew himself up with his own bomb in my backyard of my family home. He was a young IRA volunteer. I remember that day well. I mean, it was a most beautiful sunny day and hot. It was. All I know is, I remember somebody saying to me, "That's your house." The bomb went off and just the smoke was still lifting, and I ran. I just by instinct just ran, and I opened the back gate, and it was only a few seconds. I scanned the area. I mean, I have 4 sisters, and there was wings, and I just froze. I seen Brian in the corner, in the grass. He reached out to me, but more so with his eyes than anything else. Of course, the word went down around the community, and people were talking about it, and there was a clearing out and clearing up, and when the body was gone, I went back out to the garden. And my uncle was there, Uncle Nellie Devon, and he was just getting what was undetected in the clear up, just wee fragments, and I helped him. You know, I don't know. I have questions. What's it all about? Like, what is, you know, is there any meaning to, is there anything else? I just pulled the shutters down. I just froze inside. And you know what? There was just that my dad was gone, Manus was gone, our friends were gone. And of course, you know, it was the pressure sometimes to, you know, do this or get involved in that or whatever. I'd ask that question deep down inside. Could I kill? And the answer was nah. Nah. I'd seen it. Another journey was to begin for me. That would turn out to be a major struggle, but it also turned out to be the most important thing for me at that time. Alcohol. First few years was great crack. But, man, I struggled. You know, it's a long time. On the wagon, off a wagon, on the wagon, off a wagon, making promises. But I was 45 years of age when I had my last drink. In the middle of all that, you know, experimented with this and experimented with that and checked this out and checked that out, looking for answers. And I had thrown the baby out with a bathwater in regards to religion a long time ago, and I came to John's Gospel, and I thought, I'll read this and just shake off any conditioning or baggage and just read it raw. And at that same time, in Buncrana of all places, I met a bunch of Christians. And they says, you know, you can have a personal relationship. You know, if you reach out, you can have that personal relationship with God through Christ. That was new to me. I'd never thought in that terms. I explored that. And you know what? I reached out. And in that wee house, down in the heart of the bogside, I had an experience, I'll tell you, that went so deep and was so profound. Whoa. I just knew that not only a commitment, but there was a change. I would never be the same again. And I never was. Most people these days know me as one of the bogside artists, the guys that paint the murals down on the bogside. There's three of us, my brother Willie Kelly, and my lifelong friend Kevin Hassan. And we were all involved in the arts. But we came together and we knew that this would be a new thing, and it would be authentic. It would have to be real. Well, I mean, we all loved through it, and it would be a collective thing. It wouldn't be about the artists. We'd have to keep ego out of it. This was about the community and about the people, and this was our experience of living through conflict. But it would be, most importantly, a cathartic experience when we would finish. we were very inspired by, I remember a quote from Bishop Desmond Tutu, who said that conflict's like an open wound. And unless you have the courage to look at it and examine it and clean it out, will it really heal? Well, the People's Gallery, that's what it would be. It would be an examination. It would be a close looking of where we were, where we are, where we're going. But there would be that spiritual vein running through it. For example, the Annette McGavigan mural. The wee school there, shot dead by the British Army. And we decided, well, first of all, we'd take responsibility for our work, and whatever craftsmanship or skill we would just bring it to bear on behalf of the community and the people. And we would go to the people, and we went to Annette McGavigan's mother, Annie, and her husband, and me, her sister, and a few others in the family. We sat down and we had a cup of tea, and we says, we wanted to paint Annette, and we wanted to just show the simple beauty and innocence of this young girl, but she would represent symbolically all the children, Protestant, Catholic, Irish, English. They were incredible. They says, absolutely. I guess they know that sometimes, you know, your loved one can be just reduced to a statistic, a name, and a newspaper. Annette McGavigan would not be just another statistic. For us, this would speak about the innocence and the children in particular. We even contacted the Parry and Ball family. I remember the phone call. We says the same thing. Could this young schoolgirl, with all the fragmentation behind her and the butterfly that speaks of new birth and new life, could this wee girl represent their boys too? And they says the same thing. Absolutely. Very gracious. And we painted that mural. And somebody said that all 12 murals of the People's Gallery, they're like a lament, like a song that still sings over the city. But it was important to us that there always was that element of hope in our work. And under only close inspection, do you find that? For example, the Bloody Sunday portraits, 14 victims, all brutally shot down that day, inside a perfect circle. Why? Because the circle represents that they were in our circle. They were friends, they were neighbors, they were people we knew. But the circle also represents the eternal, the immortal God. Because this isn't all there is. It isn't all there is. There is a human, God-given spirit that goes on. It doesn't end here.
The way he could speak about his daddy makes you wonder. There's the things he can talk about, I suppose. 72 was awful. One hell of a year. But there was life in it too. And to be honest, there was something about being young, especially in such a serious situation, that was magnificent. People were still young and they found ways of being young. There was the Glen, but Borderland. That was the place for me. Every Friday night you could not have beaten us away from there. It was like you could let your breath out in the dance hall. I remember a friend telling me a sort of a funny story. He'd joined up. He was young, mostly doing messages. But Dickie Rock was due to appear in Borderland this particular Friday, so he goes to his commander and he says, do you see that message that you wanted done on Friday? Could I do it on Thursday or Saturday? It's just that Dickie Rock's appearing in Oh, I can tell you, he never asked again. Oh, I don't know. There was a kind of innocence in the middle of everything. As somebody said on another matter, it's like this. We thought we were special, invited to some great banquet. What we didn't realize was that we were on the menu.
I'm the sister of a young adult, only 16, a wonderful young man who died in a bomb in Belturbet at the end of 1972. I'm the sister he never met, and he died on the Feast of the Holy Innocents, December 28th. And Paddy was an innocent young man. He was beautiful looking. I'm often told of girls who fancied him, and they tell me if he had have lived that they could have been my sister-in-law. Well, I'm that sister. There was torrential rain that day, and Paddy was working with a man called Colm on a Calor gas delivery lorry. For whatever reason, they couldn't deliver that gas the evening, so they decided to stay overnight in Belturbet. They stayed in a B&B, McCall's. I think the daughter of the house, Eileen, fell in love when she saw Paddy. But her mother was sick and she was supposed to be looking after her. But she said, Mammy, if you let them stay, I look after them. Later on that evening, after they had their tea, Paddy said, I'm going to ring a neighbour so they can run and tell Mammy I'm not coming home. That's the kind of young man he was. Paddy was in the phone box calling home when the bomb went off, and there was carnage. A man, Paddy O'Reilly, came down and took him out of the phone box and said the act of contrition in his ear. People should know what was done to my brother. Paddy O'Reilly said it was a sad case An innocent wee boy split open, a memory I will take to my grave. His feet were in the phone box and there was blood baked all over him. I thought I was a tough man, but I'm no tougher than the next. He was like a cinder. My mammy and daddy did not send him out to come home like that. That night at home in Clara, it was Christmas, so they were all up late. When the late news came on, there was a bulletin that said 2 young people were killed in Belturbet and bombs had gone off in 2 other places. My parents and my brothers and sisters got on their knees to pray for the 2 young children and the parents of the children who were killed. That's the kind of home this young man came from. What they didn't realise that night is that they were praying for themselves. Then, around 4 o'clock in the morning, there was a knocking at the door and stones been thrown up at the window. Daddy got up, but Mammy, being 6 months pregnant with me, stayed in bed. But when she heard the priest say, "Paddy's dead," she got up. She went to the top of the landing and she said, "Oh no, Joe, your father." But Daddy said, "No, Teresa, it's not my father. It's our Paddy. Our Paddy's been killed." And in her own words, the next thing she felt was me move up inside her underneath her ribcage. And that's where she said I stayed until I was born. The next morning, as my brothers and sisters woke, they were sent to different houses. The older ones were allowed to stay at home. It was only the older 3 who went to the funeral. My mother didn't go. The doctor advised against it. She stayed at home with her sister Maeve. She remembered hearing a noise that day, and when she tried to figure out what it was, she realised it was herself, crying in her sister Maeve's arms. Whatever my mother felt that day, I felt. And it took me a long time and a lot of money to understand that. But our connection was huge. Years later, if she was at home feeling anxious and I was away somewhere, I would always know. Growing up, I never understood those feelings. I was nearly 30 before I did. My mother and father were very quiet people. My mother, in my memory, would have kept it together a little bit better than Daddy. Daddy, all you had to do was say something sad and Daddy would cry. Mammy would have been a little bit harder than that. No, not harder, but she was a woman, a little more in control of her emotions. I think if it had have happened now, they would have broken up not long after. In some senses, what happened did break them up. They dealt with it completely separately in my memory. I know that's what happened. Him being one side, her the other. They had their own divide, but they loved us more than anything. And we would all have the same thing to say, that they loved us more than anything, when they couldn't love each other, I imagine. But then there were times when I saw the way my daddy would look at my mammy, and I would look at them and think, if I ever get a man, I want him to look at me like that. He loved my mother. He idolised the ground she walked on. And that became really obvious when we were losing her. He never missed an opportunity to kiss her when she was dying. You know, I'm not saying anything bad about Mammy and Daddy. It's a miracle they functioned as well as they did. I don't know how she got out of bed, and I don't know how he went to work. I know that if it happened to me, if it were my child, I'd never celebrate anything again. Mammy and Daddy never spoke about how Paddy was killed. I don't think they knew how to. Daddy never told us the story. There was a brown box in the house and everything to do with Paddy, all about him. Mass cards, newspaper cuttings went into that. And it was locked. My older brothers and sisters picked the lock on the brown box and read everything that was inside it. And when it came to my time, I too read everything in secret. But when their days were good, they were amazing. And you'd love going home on those days. There were days when you'd go home and Mammy wouldn't speak and Daddy wouldn't speak. And it wasn't anything either of them had done. They just didn't have any words for each other. They just didn't have any words. It's at times like those my older brothers and sisters did much of the minding of me. Or I could go to my cousin Linda's house, who was like a sister to me. There was one time Mammy did speak to me. Daddy was after having a heart attack and was gone to hospital. And when you live in a small house with a big family, you'll sleep anywhere. So I was only too happy to get into bed with Mammy. We snuggled up. I was 17. And I said, I was thinking that Daddy could have died today. When you lose your child, you can lose anyone, Mammy said to me. I could go through anything again except having to bury another child. That's when she told me about the priest coming and me going back up inside her. It's the first time she really spoke about it, but then they hardly spoke to each other about it. I don't think they knew how to. Daddy told Mammy that Paddy had one mark on his forehead, and that's what she believed till the day she died. Although we never walked the same ground at the same time, of course I consider myself to have a brother. You could not have a brother who's left such a void. And it's the void that's my brother, if you get me. My dad's void was filled with bitterness, God love him. My mother's with forgiveness. She had that kind of compassion about her. They were, my family, decimated. I don't ever recall Paddy's death not having been a presence over me. Ever. And then, 21 years later to the day since Paddy was killed, our cousin John died. And then, in 2017, Linda, John's sister, also died on the 28th of December. She was my sister. She minded me. She minded my soul. Here's the thing. Here's what I want to tell you. That physical bomb that killed Paddy in the phone box and Geraldine O'Reilly in the chip shop, that bomb left a 6-foot crater in the ground. That hole was filled in and wrecked cars replaced. But that bomb killed something inside of my Mammy and Daddy. And there is nothing on this earth will ever heal my brothers and sisters. Nothing. That bomb ruined my life, and I've a great life. But that bomb robbed me of my Mammy and my Daddy. And it killed something inside of them. And it was the death of the love they had. They all had for somebody. It shouldn't have happened. It just shouldn't have happened.
That was powerful.
Thank you. What's your name?
And me,
Yeah.
I'm the caretaker.
I'm sure you weren't christened that.
No, I wasn't. It's Eamon McGettigan, Basil.
Basil?
Basil Brush.
Well, Eamon, here's a wee something for you from all of us. It's just to say thank you.
What for?
Oh, for the wee birds you gave Siobhan and everything you've done.
Oh, sure, but it's nothing at all.
I know, but thank you.
Well, I wasn't expecting that one. I was not. Except there's been strange things happening lately, like this. Now, I'm not religious, thank God. Not a puff of it in me. But I've started doing this when I'm stuck. Like offering something up. Something that's beyond me. Or a wish sent to somebody else. Don't ask, I couldn't tell you. But it seems to make sense. And then I heard a song on Drive 105, or was it Foyle? Anyway, it was like I was meant to, as if I was ready for it. It was I Remember Everything, the last song John Prine recorded. And for some reason it got me thinking about my ex-wife without wanting to kill her. I thought I might ask her to meet up so I could say something. Maybe that our sex wasn't adequate, though I meant that in a good way. I could say it was grand, which is really what I meant. I might meet her and do that. Who knows? Anything can happen. And I'll have to think again about burying the bones of our stories as if they were treasure or something infected or secrets. We hold them for fear that they'll hurt our loved ones, and maybe that's right. Or maybe it's the holding's the problem. I don't know. I've no coat or anything to clean with. Well, if those people have left any traces, maybe that's no harm. You know, I heard them all laughing this morning, and that really threw me. What have they to be laughing about, I wondered? Anyone would. But now I'm thinking to myself that you can't cry forever. You can't cry forever like you can't hold your breath forever. Even if you wanted to, even if you tried your best, your own lungs would fight you for dear life. And they would win. And I'll tell you something else. Whether it's time or not, here's a song that's enough to be going on with.
We were young, like the year just begun. We had dreams in our eyes. We stood hand in hand by the rise of the land. We were the dreamers of dreams, impossible schemes. Then the radio said the blood's running red down the streets of the old town. Sound of gunfire, checkpoints and barbed wire as the days handed down. Down and down. Here where love and light were gunned down on the street had just begun. We had dreams and hope fades in the wake of a ticking bomb. By the rise of the land, we were the dreamers of dreams, impossible schemes. Then the radio said the blood's running red down the streets of the old town. Sound of gunfire, checkpoints and barbed wire as the days handed death down. Here where love and light were gunned down on the street. Hope fades in the wake of a ticking bomb. A generation holds on. If we lose humanity, you see, anything can happen, and only tragedy remains. Streets where we played in 72 on the day I lost you. Armor lights and flags and fresh body bags, sectarian death squads kill for country and God. There's a place now between the hurt and the healing, and we can sit with the past without war, without bleeding. But I still miss you. I still remember the way you smiled. I still miss you, my child. Silence be the only sound. No, 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 no. No, no. No, 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 no. Voices speak. miss you. And we all shine a light on you tonight. And together we'll hold the line.
My name's Andy Doherty. I played the character of Marcus. He's the protagonist, Cal's best friend. He's 20s, young lad, lively, a charmer, a chancer. And he's growing up in Derry at this time where the civil rights marches are starting to happen, and he's his hands full between trying to pick up the gears at McGee University and come together for the civil rights marches. Come on. They say them college gears are up for it all the time. We'll just put on a brave face. We'll walk in.
We cannot imagine Northern Ireland without
our music,
our dance,
our paintings,
our books,
our poetry.
Theatre, it's films, it's TV dramas.
Can you? No, I don't think so.
COVID-19 has been hard for everyone around the world. As we start to recover, the arts will become essential to our social and economic healing and our well-being.
I've been involved in the arts in Northern Ireland on and off since about 1976. When I played in small pickup bands running around the country at a very dangerous time. And I watched how the arts community rose to the challenge that was presented to it at that point. And I watched how the people rose with them.
I am supporting this campaign because I believe that art helps shine a light on who we really are.
Let's celebrate our differences, our spicy originality.
I believe that the arts and cultural sector in Northern Ireland is the greatest opportunity we have and our youngsters have of bringing our community stronger together.
I support this campaign because the arts are such an integral part of my life and the life of my community. I don't know who we'd be without them.
I'm supporting this campaign because without help, our writers, our artists, our performers will be unable to do what they have always done. Ask the important questions about who we are and who we might yet be.
I support this campaign because a world without arts and without music to me is unthinkable. I don't want it to be too late.
At the moment, this same arts community is facing an unprecedented challenge of COVID-19.
I'm supporting this campaign because we shouldn't have to ask to save the arts. We should be asking how the arts can save us.
I support this campaign because I really believe in the crazy, freaky future of avant-garde, contemporary, Northern Irish twang dance.
But without support, much of our arts and culture here will be lost.
4 million visitors each year engage with our arts and our culture. And arts bring millions of pounds in revenue to the economy. And arts employ thousands upon thousands of people.
Many of our artists and freelancers will be forced to give up their careers. Please help us ensure that that doesn't happen.
We urgently need your support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To say welcome back. You're very welcome back to this evening, a very, very special evening. My name is Maureen Hetherington, and I work with The Junction. It's a community relations and peacebuilding initiative, and I'm also director of Towards Understanding and Healing, and that's how we deal with the past using story. So I'm hugely privileged and humbled to be here tonight. Very emotional watching it. The performances were absolutely phenomenal. I can only speak for myself, but I think that I represent many, many people to just say huge thank you and gratitude that you've had the courage and commitment to come here to tell your story, your lived experience. And I would like to think that, you know, even though the violence has impacted you all very directly, that down the road, I hope that when people look back, they will say, it was the wise people who did that. And it's the need for the personal lived experience that we don't turn to statistics, we keep it with the human and emotional detail. So this evening we're going to do a 20-minute session of some questions for the actors and the director and the producer. First of all, we've got Kieran at the end here, who's the director, and thank you Victor and Hazel and Susan for being here, and also our artist in residence, Damian. So we got some very interesting feedback. Is it okay if I read this to you so that you can catch your breath? And you know, first night, opening night, it must have been very nerve-wracking. So some of the feedback is, this is extremely timely, as a few individuals find comfort in holding on to old wrongs. No will not forget. In some case, we will not forgive. Still, we move forward. Another one said, a privilege to hear these stories, many tears. Another member said, so poignant, powerful, personal, hopefully healing. Whoa, this is brilliant, so moving. Thank you all. Another said, very moving stories. Another member of the audience said, very moving, we lost someone in the Troubles, and it is still raw today. And another said, absolutely brilliant, well done. This is amazing, watch if you can. This is a must watch, folks, spoken by victims and survivors. Another said, whoa, this is so moving. Beautifully written, Manus. I looked up to him, he looked out for me. Brilliant, well done to everyone involved. So brave and moving, thank you for sharing your personal stories with us. So I'm very aware that there's many months in the preparation of all this. Can I ask you first, Damian? I worked with you many years ago, and you always talked about threading the human and emotional detail onto what has happened. So how poignant or how important has this project been for you as someone who deeply cares about threading the emotional and human detail onto the awful violence that has happened?
Well, that's something I said in the programme, Maureen. It's the most important single thing. I mean, the Cran that we worked on together with Eamon Dean and Eamon Baker and some other people, Dave Duggan, that was very, very important. This is the most important single thing that I have ever done, without any doubt, work-wise. And look, story, and as Victor has said to me, and he's right, story's maybe not the right term. People were not really just telling stories tonight. They were deciding to allow life experiences to come through them, and these life experiences at times I think tore at them in this process, but they allowed them to come right through them. Why? Because, well, they can tell you themselves, but what they told me was on some level they thought it might do a bit of good. So people would say to you, stories or life experiences being shared, it's connective tissue, it's connective human tissue. We know that if you're in a bar, if you're in a coffee shop, if you're having a laugh, as at times we have done here raucously, believe it or not. There is that. But then if somebody is saying, this is a very hard thing I'm going to do, I'm going to step out into this space, and I'm going to say this really deeply personal heart, as I said earlier, heart on the line story across that space. That's the only thing I have to get me across that space between me and into the company of strangers. If you're watching somebody, if you're beside somebody who's deciding to do that, you're connected with something else as well as crack. You're connected with courage. You're connected with spirit. You're connected with somebody who's actually a wee bit further down the road in our terms here in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, than you are, than I am. So you're connected in ways there too. So it's just been wonderful. But as Tom said, this does not end here. For us, this does not end here as a group of people. And I think what they've done does not end here either tonight.
And we'll come back to that because you talked about the crack. And I just witnessed backstage there just how relieved, but how funny people were being, you know, and that's sitting alongside tragic, awful stories, painful stories. How did you manage that, you know, coming together and the gelling? That must have been powerful, and that would need to work in order to make this performance so beautifully well done.
Well, I'll answer that and then leave it, because the very first thing we did was we had a quiz. I think it was a wonderful quiz. Wonderful quiz. Okay, we have to deal with the past, Victor. We had a quiz. I wanted it to be Protestants against Catholics, but people wanted men against women. Now, this is a very innocent thing, and then I'm shutting up. At the end of it, I was sitting beside one of the women. It was very close, and in the last round, nobody was sure who had won, and I totted it up, and I said to one of the women, "It's okay, we won." Now, then this was brought into a whole thing that I was showing favour to one as the quiz master, but it was just a slip of the tongue. So, no, but joking aside, I think, and it was the same in the Crown, I think you've no ground to meet on at the start. You've no ground to start doing anything. You've asked somebody to come along, and they've decided I will or I won't because of how you've carried their request. But then you start building the ground that you can do anything on. And we built it on the very shaky ground of a quiz and a bit of crack and so on. So now I will hand this over to Susan, who will tell you the proper way.
Even I can't do that though. And I can talk. Can't answer that one.
Okay, so come back to that later probably. Kieran, as a director, there's an awful lot to think about. All the practicalities, all the logistics, the positioning of people, helping with the design of the stage. Hugely phenomenal amount of work. But this is quite a unique experience. These are personal lived experiences of horrific stories. How did you cope with that? Were you able to cope with that? And how did you manage that against all of the other things that was being asked of you?
It's a really good question, Maureen. I've thought about it a lot, and one of the things that came to me in the making of this was a link between intimacy and vulnerability. Because I would step into a rehearsal room with complete strangers to begin with, and in a very short period of time they were truly vulnerable with me, and I considered that very intimate. So because of that, I felt myself, it's a sense of magnetism, I felt myself drawn closer to them. It's because of the act of heroism or act of love that it was tangible, you know. And we're sitting here tonight, and there's the essence of other human beings sitting amongst us, you know. And hopefully their families are sitting with us and listening to that. And in the making of that, and in the sharing of that in the room, it truly did change me. I would go home at night and I'd kiss my son and my daughter good night and thank God for them, because I stand on their shoulders. You know, truly stand on their shoulders, on their bravery. And it's not a passing phrase, believe me, it really isn't, because of what happened. But you mentioned at the beginning of your question about this. This is ours by amazing people. You know, I could spend time really getting into how I feel about those people and what they've done to move this and to make something move during this time. But I have to publicly say, and if you give me the space to say thank you to them, because it simply would not be possible to put this on the stage and allow our team the platform to step forward and hopefully move someone else's heart or stir something within them. And whatever that stirring is, the distance between the stirring and maybe a resolution or an understanding, I don't know what that is, but maybe tonight's the beginning of it.
Thank you, Kieran. Beautiful. It's hard because when you've been caught up in the Troubles too, you see all these amazing pictures, and you know, we're calling people back home. We're remembering them. We're, you know, by naming them, we're calling them back to this space, and it's so important to do that we don't ever forget the lives that have been lost, what violence has done. So thank you. Victor, can I come to you and ask a question? You talked about being brought up in the Glen and how you absolutely loved music and that saved you. I was also very interested as somebody, you talked about being a Protestant, being brought up here. What was it like for you to tell that particular story?
The problem that we have is, and I've did this before a number of years ago with towards understanding and healing with Eamon, which was the start of it really. But I find that people from the Protestant community don't talk about their experiences of what happened to them during the Troubles. And as it's on the programme, we feel that maybe the other side don't want to hear that other people suffered through the years, and for that reason we feel that they may listen but they don't hear. And I think it's time that we as a community come out and tell of our suffering, of what we went through during the Troubles as well. It just wasn't a one-sided thing. Everybody, there were other people suffered as well. But it was hard. It was hard 2 years ago. I'm 50 years involved in entertainment, and I've worked with large crowds. But this was so nerve-wracking to come out and to do what we did tonight. But what I have to say is what made it easier has been the support that we have had as participants from Damian, who wrote, and I can't really say wrote because what we said, although we read it down and he put it in the script, these were all our own words. To Kieran, our director, who has been phenomenal, who has been there from day one practically. To Chloe, to Elaine, to the whole team here in the Playhouse, who have made it possible for us to sit here and do this event. I mean, when we were told in March we were standing down, we didn't know we would ever get back and do it, but we have, and we've been here. But it's been thanks to all those people and the support, and to each and every one of the participants here tonight. We bonded. We have a fantastic bunch of people, and it's been an honour and a privilege to be with these people throughout this experience.
And thank you. When you talked about, you know, it was very, very hard to do. It's the courage that makes you do that. You know, to stand up and stand out and expose yourself in a way. And I remember reading an article that was told by a particular person, and many people came up and said, I will never tell my story, but thank you for telling it for me.
Yes, people. I know people who find it hard. I know people who can't even talk to their husbands now. What happened to their loved ones throughout the years? They can't even talk about it. Yeah. But it's hard. But let's say thanks to the support that we've had here from the whole team here at the Playhouse, we've been able to do this.
Yeah, and it's powerful what you say, how people can't talk about it, you know. So where do you go? You know, how do you find that support as well? So thank you, Victor. Yeah. Hazel, I know a little bit about your story, and I found it very moving, you know. And I feel that, you know, in a patriarchal society, the woman's story, or the people who are left behind, such as yourself, with 4 children, it must have been so difficult because your story often isn't heard, it hasn't been put out there. So how was it for you in the aftermath of losing a breadwinner? How did it impact you? How were you treated? And what was it like economically for you as well?
I think the story sometimes only begins after the act. There's an after story, isn't there, really? And I think in the conflict that the woman's story has been undertold, because very much so the woman has had to keep it all together and kind of just get on with whatever you've had to deal with. You just have to keep going on and on and on because you have kids. In my case, I found it really difficult, but it was for them and for me. And when I told it in the story, I sincerely meant that. I wanted my kids to know and not to lose their childhood, and I wanted them to grow up in a society of shared spaces. Economically, I would actually say maybe there was times I felt I was robbed of grieving, because 6 weeks after Trevor died, I had to go back to work because I just didn't have the money. It seems maybe a bit vulgar even talking about money and whatever, but the reality was I had to add his funeral expenses onto my mortgage. And that's just the fact of what it was. I had to take on a second job. So part of me felt not only were you robbed of grieving, but part of you was robbed on the rearing of your children, because they were coming home from school and you were doing homeworks and doing tea, and then you were going back out to do the second job. But that's how we managed. And I'm here to tell the tale. I never wanted to come across as if this is something that, oh, woe me. I'm here. I think I have made my children very strong and independent children. And it's just, what's happened has happened, and we have to move on.
Thank you. And just as I was sitting with some of the other people, they actually asked, you know, they asked me to ask you how you think your children will react at seeing you now doing this. What will be the impact on them in the here and now?
My children only heard the story for the first time tonight. And my brother, who's done the audience, only heard the story for the first time tonight. The actual, my version and how it was for me. When I came off stage, first thing I did was FaceTime all 3 of my daughters. My son's in Australia, so I actually couldn't speak to him. And once I knew they were okay, then I was okay, and they all were very supportive, very proud. My grandson was crying and my brother was crying downstairs. You know. But there becomes an age, and for me, they didn't need to know this story when they were young. I wanted them to know this story when they were at an age that they could cope with it. And no, it's not something that, this is what happened. We've had to go through this, we've dealt with this, and we've come out the other side.
Lovely. You know. Well, thank you, Hazel. Susan, when you started to tell your story, I got very, very emotional because I was heavily pregnant with my first child when my husband was shot. So I was reliving some of that, you know. Sometimes you learn to cope with trauma, and things do trigger it, you know, so I was very appreciative of you sharing it. I suppose what interests me in your story is that transgenerational impact. You weren't even born, and yet, you know, you said it ruined my life.
Mm.
So how did you find your voice? Were people willing to listen? And how did you find your voice and be able to tell your story, your lived experience?
Kieran found my voice. No, sorry. I was lucky enough, I was given my voice by amazing parents, really and truly. And I was given the voice, I suppose, for this because they couldn't talk about it. I worked so hard on crying not tonight. Yeah, my parents definitely gave me my voice. I was loved and cared for, that I could say what I needed to say anytime I needed to say it. So I was really lucky that way. So yeah, it was easy to come, tough to get over the initial emotion of what I was saying, but I worked through that, and here I am. And then the love and care, as Victor said, that we got here, you know, it was pretty easy for us all to come on stage. And having the support of the other participants and Pat as well, but his little words of encouragement before we'd go on was something else. So yeah, that's where I got my voice.
Yeah. Thank you. And it's probably for me, I've worked in the field of peace building, but also gathering stories for many years. And it's one of those stories I don't think gets told.
No.
You know.
No. And then, as well as that, our story was never told.
No.
You know, it wasn't just the fact that it was south of the border, but like they never got anything. There was never, the week after it happened, it was like it never happened in our house. And I think that's one of the reasons that the box happened, is because they didn't know what to do, they didn't know where to go, they didn't have other people to share their experience with in 1972 in Clara.
Yeah.
And then as like Paddy was buried, and the following Monday, my dad had to get up and go to work. He had 9 mouths to feed at home. There was, you know, he had to do it. My mother was heavily pregnant, so she couldn't go out and work. She did always work, you know, but like at that time she couldn't go out and work. But they struggled on, and they were amazing.
Yeah. This is a lovely testimony to them, to bring them back.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it was we had an amazing home, and I'm a little bit jealous that my older brothers and sisters got the other mammy and daddy, but seemingly the other mammy and daddy were very cross, so I got a nicer mammy and daddy and got away with a lot more. So I suppose that's my only good thing out of it.
Thank you, Susan.
No problem.
I suppose just a reflective question for anybody here, you know, how has this particular project impacted on you? Has it changed you? You said, Damian, about how would you move forward? You will move forward, you know. It's about, you make this performance, and then what happens after when the lights go out? What will happen here? How has it changed you? And what will you take from this, maybe?
I don't think it's just a case of when the lights goes out, because that has been the spectacular thing about this. For me, I was very hesitant to even to come and do this, because I wasn't sure how this would be. But we have had that care, and it nearly felt, you know, for me personally, when I had the likes of Kieran and Elaine would always be texting or whatever, that when I would be in comedy rehearsals with Chloe and Kieran, the care and the I think he was right. I felt very vulnerable, very exposed, because I actually found myself telling them more about stuff that would be all night if I started to tell that story. But because of their care, their thoughtfulness, I think we can turn off, me personally, I know I can go home tonight and turn off that light and know that I'm able to cope with that because of how they treated us and how it was in the lead up to it. It's not a case of, come on and tell your story, see you later, bye-bye.
Yeah, absolutely
And
not.
it's not. And I think that is so important, because sometimes that can happen. And I've had an experience once of that, and it was very difficult. But I was worried if I picked the scab, how would I deal with that? And they've helped me self-analyse a lot of the things that when we were talking, I didn't even realise what happened. They let me do the talking, they listened, and I feel comfortable. I could tell them anything. And one thing I have learned from this experience is I met these people, bar Victor, I knew nobody, and I'm leaving here knowing the people I'm leaving, I've made lifelong friends. And I think that's a testimony to the production team of the Derry Playhouse.
Absolutely. Because like Hazel knew Victor, I didn't even know how to get to Derry. And I just want everybody to know it takes 3.5 hours. So that's a 7-hour round trip every week. And I told them that every week I arrived. And I was accommodated so well. On the Sundays, because I'm last, on the Sundays we'd kind of come in and I'd do my bit and walk out. I didn't even have the manners to sit around and wait for everybody else. And all I'd have to do is 3.5 hours, have to go. And they were brilliant, like, you know, they accommodated me that way. And
We're just glad to see you go, that's what it was. Let's be honest about it, like a spade's a spade.
yeah, on the Friday, have you left yet, Susan? What time will you be here at? You couldn't wait to get me back. Come on, Victor.
Oh yeah, I know. I love you really.
It was absolutely brilliant. And like even in the green room before we come out, not even in the green room, we might meet for a coffee or anything. That, you know, it really has brought us together as a group.
They are, even
Damian's funny sometimes.
Even Damian's part of it, you know.
Did you say even Damian's funny sometimes? How very dare you. How very dare you. Comedy gold. Comedy gold.
Yeah, but we never stopped laughing the other night, and I think Damien actually thought, what's going on with these two? But we laughed from
I had tears coming down my face.
I think the biggest problem now is Damien, me, and Richard Moore. I mean, we're thinking of going on stage. We're going on tour.
The Three Stooges.
I nearly didn't wet myself during the dress rehearsal. That's something Richard said and Victor said, which can't be spoken about in a public forum. Yeah. I nearly didn't wet myself.
I actually thought he was going to faint last night and something Richard said.
Somebody's waving
but
at
again,
us.
we can't discuss that.
I think we're getting there.
We're getting it's not because Elaine thinks we've run out of time. It's because she thinks we're going to tell it what Richard actually said. But we know that there's broadcasting regulations.
Well, listen, well done again. Damien, I've known you for many, many years, and you never cease to amaze me. Just these stories are so important, and just thank you so much for bringing this here, all of you, because the stories down the road, when we talk about statistics and figures, you know, we have to keep going back to what really happened. You know, the multiplicity of the stories and the experiences that the people have had to go through, and hopefully we learn the lessons. And it's because of you amazing folk that hopefully lessons will be learnt. And as I said at the beginning, people down the road will say it was the wise people who did that. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, and for all of the people out there watching.
Thank you.
Thanks a million. Thanks.